Hey Squishies, back again with another vlog. This is Your Name, a commission request by Nick Borovic. Where to start? I think I'm going to start with the fact that Makoto Shinkai doesn't want you to watch this movie. I've seen a couple articles floating around to the effect that he is embarrassed by how successful this movie is and how much critical praise he's been getting for it. He feels like it's incomplete. They had other things they wanted to do and ran out of money. So they ended up having to run with what they had, having to finish up the film and release what they had. It has nonetheless been a gigantic smash success with huge amounts of critical praise. People comparing him to Miyazaki, which people have actually been doing low-key for his entire career, essentially. But now it's really, out there that, yes, this is the next Miyazaki. And he's embarrassed by all that, because he feels like it's not actually his best work. Well, Mr. Shinkai, too bad. Should have thought of that before he made the movie a fucking masterpiece, because holy crap. This is probably the best movie I've seen all year. And I saw some pretty good movies this year. But this just blew the rest away. This is already up there as one of my favorite anime films of all time. It's up there with Rebellion and The Girl Who Leapt Through Time and Summer Wars and Princess Mononoke. That's the tier that this is on. And I'm really glad, because I feel Shinkai's previous films are the ones that I've always felt weren't quite finished. I've always felt like there's something not quite there that was there with the thing that kind of made his name, which was the short film Voices of a Distant Star, which is where I discovered him, where I first learned about him. There was a showing of it at Otakon back in, 2000, 2001, somewhere around then. And I immediately went and bought the DVD. And the DVD had two short films by Shinkai on there. One was a very simple little short called She and Her Cat that he had animated and entered into a contest, and then he used the prize money to fund making Voices of a Distant Star, which he did by himself on his home computer, and he and his wife were the only voice actors. Later it was re-recorded with professional voice actors, and they had both tracks on there. But it was just a jaw-dropping piece of work. And his next couple of movies were good, but they didn't grab me the way that Voices of a Distant Star did, because Voices of a Distant Star took a really clear science fictional idea, in fact scientific idea, the relativistic concept of simultaneity, and wedded it to a simple, clear story of love and loss, and merged them into one thing. And it was visually stunning, emotionally powerful, thought-provoking. It just hit all the registers in 12 minutes. That was that movie. This movie, I feel like, is where he's come back to that, in the sense of he's taken this relatively simple and clear but high concept idea of body swapping and this love story, and merged them and made them both work spectacularly. But I think people saying he's the next Miyazaki are wrong. I'm going to get shot for this. I'm going to get a lot of shit for this. I already thought, before I saw this movie, that Shinkai was a better director than Miyazaki. His best work was not as good as Miyazaki's best work, but I felt like, I guess you would say the potential was there. That every one of his movies, like, was, if it had just been that little bit more or different or whatever it was, would have blown me away. And this is the one where he finally did it. You know, because, I mean, like I was just talking about with Howl's Moving Castle, Miyazaki in his elegiac mode, I'm not really there for that. And yet that's exactly what Shinkai brings to his movies, is this kind of dreamy sense of loss, this idea of memory and all these things. But I think there's a key difference. That's why I connect with Shinkai more than I do with Miyazaki's more elegiac films, which is Miyazaki is nostalgic for something that has been lost. Shinkai regrets things that never were. Like, for Miyazaki, it's, we had something wonderful and we let go of it. Isn't that sad? And Shinkai is, we could have had something wonderful, but we missed it. Isn't that sad? And of the two, the latter one is just a feeling that I find more familiar and that I identify with more. There's not much in my past that I look back on and I'm like, you know, I wish I'd kept that. But there's a lot of stuff that I look back on as like, I wish I'd done this other thing. I wish I'd taken that chance. I wish I'd gone after that possibility. So I think those just, you know, resonate more with me personally, emotionally. And there's also, you know, the emotional core of, it's always very simple with Shinkai. Again and again in his movies, it's this, the emotional core is pretty much always a guy and a girl separated by reality itself. That there's just impassable barrier between them, whether that's vast distances or time or weird science fictional shenanigans. Like, there's always something that means that these two people who have this connection are pulled apart, and the connection is strained and strained and strained and narrows down and thins down, but it never quite breaks. And, you know, this movie uses a very traditional Japanese symbol of that, red thread, the red braided cord, the red ribbon. That's what connects the two of them. And that's like an old, I believe, Shinto thing. It might be from the Buddhist side of Japanese culture, but I mean, not that those are entirely separable from most of Japanese history. But excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold, hence the sniffle. As I understand it, the idea is that there are these invisible red threads that the kami or whoever weave between people to connect them. And that, you know, they tie souls together, and that's like drawn together in, you know, love. And I like a lot of things about that image. My favorite thing about it is invisible red, because of course something being both invisible and red is an oxymoron. something which is invisible cannot have a color. But that's the thing. Like, emotions aren't logical. They don't follow sensible paths. So that element of it works for me, and so I like its use here. And I am always down for a bit of supernatural romance. Not in the sense of like Twilight and that kind of thing, where it's a girl and a monster. That one's never really, I don't know, I've never really cared for that kind of story. But I mean in the sense of like people who have a mystical connection or are drawn together. And it's interesting that I like those because I'm actually like low-key hostile to the idea of soulmates. I think, just generally, I'm not a fan of, like, destiny and fate and all that kind of BS. I don't believe there is any such thing. I believe shit just happens. And, my attitude towards soulmates is essentially, like, well, there's a 1 in 3 chance that, your soulmate is in China or India or, one of those, one of those 2 countries, because those 2 countries between them have a third of the population of the world. Good luck finding them. Like, the city I live in has 500,000 people. That's half of 1/7,000th. So 1/14,000th of the population of the world. The odds of my putative soulmate living in this city are 1 in 14,000. That ain't happening. And anyway, that's not how people work, and that's not how relationships work. They don't just pop out of nowhere fully formed. They build over time, and they are constantly shifting and changing and growing and transforming, And I like that this movie does that. It's not like these 2 people are, like, destined to be together in the sense of, like, love at first sight, that kind of thing. They get to know each other over time. It's done in a montage, but the connection, the magical or whatever it is connection between them allows them to get to know each other. And so they're drawing together. It feels natural. These are 2 people who got to know each other over a period of what seems to be weeks or even months. That's a lot more believable as like something that would stick with you, as a relationship that would have an impact on you. At the same time, the movie plays around a lot with the idea of memory and of what we've forgotten and the people we've forgotten. And that's also something that, really resonates with me because I do not have a very good memory. In particular, I have a very bad biographical memory. I am bad at remembering events that have occurred to me, and I am bad at remembering, like, what people look like. I recognize them when I see them, but it is very difficult for me to remember a person's face, even if it's someone that I know well. It takes a lot of effort to get more than, like, a generic face in my head. And sometimes I just can't, even with people I know well. So that part of the movie also, like the way they keep forgetting and the way they struggle to hold on to a memory, that felt very real to me. Because, of course, forgetting is another form of, losing a might have been. This is a might have been that actually was, but it's as if it wasn't, because you've forgotten it. So it's that same kind of regret as opposed to nostalgia. That's kind of the distinction I'm drawing here. And the movie is just sumptuously gorgeous. Like I said, Shinkai's work always is, and this is some of his best. It is just beautiful. And what I really love about it is that the nature scenes and the city scenes are both equally beautiful. I remember there's one shot when Mitsuha first wakes up in Tokyo, or at least when we first see her waking up in Tokyo. It's not entirely clear whether she's been having dreams before that. There's some implication that she might have. But she wakes up in Tokyo in Taki's body, and she goes out of the apartment and sees Tokyo for the first time. And the way it's shot is like the way Miyazaki shoots forests. And I think that might be deliberate. You've got the train zipping around like the little forest animals scurrying around. You've got the shots rising up the skyscrapers like you're panning up into the trees. Of course, it's also the way that Shinkai shoots clouds, because he loves clouds, and that love remains in this movie. The same kind of very mobile camera on relatively static objects that makes them feel alive. But without, it's not like a dizzying or disorienting thing, it's more like you're swooping through them. And that's how he shoots that first shot of Tokyo. And what you get is that Tokyo and Iramoto, I think that's what the village was called, are both equally living places. Like, the life in Iramoto is calmer and quieter and more twilight and more green. And the life of the city is more whites and grays and energetic, and it's humans as opposed to plants, but it's still life. And I like that. I really do appreciate that, because when it comes down to it, I'm a city boy by nature. I love the deep woods and the mountains. Those are wonderful, magical places, but when it comes to where I want to live, give me an apartment somewhere walking distance from a subway station and a grocery store. Preferably with some kind of live theater in the vicinity. Which is where I live now. That's just, who I am. So it's the might have been, it's the path not taken. And in fact, for Itsuha, the city is the might have been. That's where she wanted to go. You'll notice if you've seen the movie, you'll notice I'm kind of delicately dancing around something. I don't care much about spoilers, but I know some of my viewers do, and since I am strongly, strongly encouraging you to watch this movie, I'm dancing around revealing too much. Because there are some really surprising and emotionally effective twists in this movie, although there are other elements to it that I was like, oh yeah, of course. The big one being that Iramoto itself And the moment they went from showing a comet to showing a perfectly round lake with slopes all around it, I was like, okay, that's an impact crater. Because any perfectly round geological formation is an impact crater. Occasionally they might be volcanic, but those, aren't necessarily always around. Impact craters are. If you really want a fun time, go look at a map. Actually, a globe is better than a map of the world because that won't distort the shapes. Go look at a globe and find perfectly round bodies of water and realize there have been some honkin' big meteors that have hit this planet. And it is frankly down to luck that nothing big and scary has hit us. Luck in the fact that we honestly haven't been around that long. And the same with the body of the god, they called it, very clearly a crater. And so I was like, okay, that's an interesting theme to be going on with here. But it makes for some gorgeous scenery. There are, the one quibble I had with the movie was, early on, Mitsuha, ironically, I'm having trouble remembering her name. Early on, Mitsuha has what is clearly a blackout. She goes to school and doesn't remember her own name, where she sits, doesn't act like her normal self, and then the next day, she has no memory of that. How the fuck did they not put her in a car and drive straight to the nearest neurologist? Wow. I cannot imagine that happening to a kid and the reaction being anything other than, holy shit, something is really wrong here, we need a doctor. And her dad does kind of react like that eventually. We eventually get a moment where her dad is like, you're acting really strangely and not making any sense, and I'm worried about you. Let's take you to the doctor. But the fact that nobody else in her family, the only person who seems to respond with a concern that she is mentally or neurologically unwell is her little sister. And part of that is, okay, her one friend, her grandmother essentially believes in magic. Is a shrine, she's a shrine maiden. There's a tradition of, funny mental things happening to the maidens of this shrine. Okay. But still, the fact that no teacher is concerned about it. Her friends, one responds with oh, you're obviously being possessed. That's not worrisome. And the other friend is just oh, my best friend is being really weird. Okay, I'm just going to play along with it. That really didn't... That bothered me a little. And the way people respond the same way with Taki, though there it's a little different because he's... Mitsuha does a better job of pretending to be Taki than Taki does of pretending to be Mitsuha. People basically respond to it as... she adapts faster. People basically respond to it as Taki being a little odd some days, but, they like the difference. And I mean, people also seem to like the difference with Mitsuha. Like, there's, scenes of, one scene of a girl and one scene of a boy, like, presenting her with love notes, which I thought was really nice, especially that they did both. I find it very interesting that, I'm blanking on her name, the senpai, the older waitress at the Italian restaurant that Taki has a crush on. I find it very interesting that she is drawn to and interested in Taki only when Mitsuha is in his body, and that we don't see, like, near the end of the movie, we see that, 5 years later she has a wedding ring, but we don't see, like, any indication of who the other person is. Doesn't necessarily have to be a man. It is possible that she realized some things about herself. That is how I choose to take it. That is how I choose to read it. And I mean, when it gets down to it, like, this is a sad movie that left me feeling really good. And that is a really powerful emotional register to hit for me. Not a lot of things do that. Now, when I say it's a sad movie, I don't mean it ended, like, I'm not talking about the ending. I'm deliberately avoiding that, but there's a lot of sadness in the movie. There's that feeling of loss and regret and paths not taken, and of course the time travel theme ties directly into that, which is something I talk about in my book, Animated Discussions, which I'll link down below. But I have a whole chapter in there on anime about time travel and how it relates to trauma. And this movie, it's not really about trauma, it's about regret, but that's a closely associated thing, because one of the things I bring up in that chapter is ghost stories. And I actually start the chapter, like the epigraph for it is a quote from Douglas Adams, which I can't do the exact wording off the top of my head, but it was basically a time machine would have immense fascination for a ghost, because here would be the way to right what once went wrong. And that's kind of the shared thing between the ghost, the spirit that cannot rest, and the time travel story is they're both about make what happened not have happened, undo the past, change the thing that is regrettable. And so that, time element in this movie, which I guess I've kind of given away now, there's an element of not exactly time travel, but something very close to it. That temporal element ties in really well with that idea of regrets and the paths not taken, because it lets you go back and take a different path and undo things that you might regret, or explore possibilities that you never got a chance to. And I think, for me at least, that's a feeling that really resonates. But at the same time, like, while the movie makes me think about, regrets and roads not taken and that kind of thing, it also makes me think about, but I am where I am and living the life that I live. And I'm not going to say that this is the best of all possible worlds, because holy shit, what a nightmare if that's true. But this is the reality that is. And what happens, happens. And I'm not going to say either that things work out in the end, because they don't. But things can work out in the middle. And that's something worth holding on to. Anyway, hope you all enjoyed that. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Check out my Patreon for early access to videos, blog posts, and more. And I'll see you all next time. Bye!